Major conversation around Nigerian political and religious circles in recent times has been U.S. President Trump's threat to blitz terrorists operating on Nigerian territory, who've been finger-pointed as being responsible for killing thousands of Nigerian Christians in the last few years.
U.S. President Donald Trump is threatening to send military forces into Nigeria unless the government stops what he called the killings of Christians by terrorists.
Tonight in our deep dive, President Trump setting his sights on Nigeria.
Now back to our lead story concerning President Bola Tinubu replying President Donald Trump on Christian genocide in parts of Nigeria.
In breaking news, President Trump is threatening to halt all financial aid and put his military on standby for a possible action against Nigeria. Making a podium address on his Truth Social platform, he gave the African nation an ultimatum. He called on it to stop the alleged killing of Christians or face dire consequences.
If the Nigerian government continues to allow the killing of Christians, the USA will immediately stop all aid and assistance to Nigeria. We're going to do things to Nigeria that Nigeria is not going to be happy about and may very well go into that now disgraced country, guns are blazing, to completely wipe out the Islamic terrorists who are committing these horrible, horrible atrocities. I'm hereby instructing our Department of War to prepare for possible action. If we attack, it will be fast, vicious, and sweet, just like the terrorist thugs attack our cherished Christians. These are cherished people. These are great people. Leave them alone. Warning, the Nigerian government better move fast before it's too late.
As has been mentioned, my name is Tim McMurtry. I serve as Wisconsin State Coordinator for Christians United for Israel. I also serve as North Campus Pastor for World Outreach and Bible Training Center in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. It gives me great pleasure and honor to be with you all here on today. Thank you for Ambassador for having this event. I also want to thank Ms. Morgan Ortegas for the invitation and thank Ms. Minaj for coming in and really showing her courage.
Today we speak of blood. We speak of the blood that still cries from Nigerian soil. And let's try to solve this. Let's try to save these people. So everyone, please join me in welcoming a daughter of the Caribbean, a champion of the oppressed, and a sister in Christ, Nicki Minaj.
Thank you, Ambassador Waltz, for this invitation. It is an honor to stand on this stage with you and the other distinguished speakers here today to shine a spotlight on the deadly threat faced by thousands of Christians in Nigeria. I would like to thank President Trump for prioritizing this issue and for his leadership on the global stage in calling for urgent action to defend Christians in Nigeria, to combat extremism, and to bring a stop to violence against those who simply want to exercise their natural right to freedom of religion or belief. I stand here as a proud New Yorker with a deep sense of gratitude that we live in a country where we can freely and safely worship God regardless of one's creed, background, or politics.
Question: why is an ordained pastor a minister of the gospel who is a part of Christians United for Israel and who is a campus pastor introducing rapper Nicki Minaj at the United Nations? And why is the United States representative to the United Nations, Michael Waltz, introducing Nicki Minaj and addressing her as his sister in Christ? Nicki Minaj's entire music career has been about promoting provocative ideas, where she has presented females as nothing more than objects. And then overnight, she has followed the foreign policy of the US Department of Defense, aligning herself with the US President Donald Trump. Something is not quite adding up. For we've been here before. For whenever the invisible government wants to cleverly market its corporate interests that they call a war, they use celebrities to excuse atrocities. I repeat, they use celebrities to excuse atrocities. Do you remember the short documentary propaganda film Coney 2012, which I called Phony 2012? The first most viral video in the digital space with its slick editing and high quality imagery. To mark this failed coup by the deep state, using an online activist as a front, they used a number of very high profile celebrities who tried and failed to emotionally coerce the world to despise a man, a Ugandan warlord called Joseph Kony, a man who nobody heard of prior to that video unless you lived in Uganda. Now it was the people of Uganda who saw the bait and said, "This is a scam. We have not seen this man in years." They alerted the rest of the world, and oil-rich Uganda got speared. But the Department of Defense, the Pentagon and Hollywood have not stopped using celebrities to market their wars. When the United States wanted to boost the morale and global reputation of the US military, presenting it as the world's savior, in the same year as Coney 2012, in 2012, the film Battleship was released. And to market the US Navy, they employed both actor Liam Neeson and the Bajan singer Rihanna. When the United States wanted to support the Islamic Mujahideen and to dehumanize the Serbs in Bosnia, in the 2001 film Behind Enemy Lines, they used the late actor Gene Hackman to show the US military might in the demographic region of Europe in the Balkans. In the 2003 Pentagon-backed Tears of the Sun, it shows a US Navy SEAL unit led by actor Bruce Willis sent to where? Nigeria in West Africa, in a Christian mission where Nigeria is undergoing civil unrest and Islamic Fulani troops are ethnically cleansing the Christian Igbo and foreigners who get in the way. Sound familiar? But really it was about securing the interests of the Anglo-Dutch Shell Oil Company, which is why foreign Western mercenary groups enter a country in the first place. Not because civilians are being hacked to death, as we'll see in a while in the study. In the 2006 film Home of the Brave about the oil war in Iraq, instead of it addressing the trauma of the Iraqi civilians who were illegally invaded by a foreign army, it was about the trauma of the US soldiers and how they have to deal with post-traumatic stress disorder. And to market this war, they used big names like the actor Samuel L. Jackson and the rapper 50 Cent. Remember, celebrities are nothing more than puppets and pawns for the deep state. When the US government needed a justification for their post-9/11 October 2001 invasion of Afghanistan, exactly 1 month after the Twin Tower attacks, when it was losing popularity with the public, they made the 2008 Pentagon-backed film Iron Man to excuse invading that Western Asian mountainous nation. And to market this war and to give it a boost in popularity, they use big names like Robert Downey Jr., Terrence Howard, Jeff Bridges, and Gwyneth Paltrow. And they also wanted a solid soundtrack for the film. So the English heavy metal band Black Sabbath, whose lead singer was the late Ozzy Osbourne, they wrote a song on their 1970 album Paranoid that was titled, guess what? Iron Man. And this was the song that was used to boost the ratings for the US-led Afghanistan invasion film Iron Man. Now, many entertaining celebrities are also members of secret societies. This is how many of them climb the ladder of success. When they are approached and are told if they want to be number one in the world, then sell your soul. But once scorned upon, being a member of a secret organization and partaking in occult practices, in the 21st century it is now being indoctrinated to young children as a very popular and cool thing. And children are being told that witchcraft is just a mild bit of fun. They will never tell you the spiritual ramifications and the number of celebrities who either themselves or family members mysteriously die. But that is not the only thing that is sucking celebrities in. They are being lured into fame through petrodollars. Now, when 9/11 happened, the United States invaded both Afghanistan in 2001 and Iraq in 2003, when it was proven that the majority of the hijackers were from Saudi Arabia. And since the Second World War to this very day, the Anglo-American elite continue to retain a close business relationship with the British colonial created state named after the family, the House of Saud, Saudi Arabia. And the Saudis have expanded their economic goals if their petroleum runs out with its Saudi Vision 2030 project, where they are using their gazillions to penetrate into the Western entertainment industry. Now, the 2016 General Entertainment Authority is responsible for Riyadh season, where they have literally penetrated into the entire sports world, with the Riyadh season logo being spotted everywhere. If you just look at the promotional videos for each sporting event, it looks like a high quality, beautifully edited film trailer, where the Saudis have been promoting video games, snooker, UFC, football, WCW and boxing. Now, if you look on the arm of the British boxer Anthony Joshua before his fight with Jake Paul, you'd see his t-shirt says Riyadh season. And there's one man who is behind this. When Chris Eubank Jr. and Chris Eubank Sr. with US rapper 50 Cent entered the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium in London, England on Saturday, the 15th of November 2025, it drew crowds like no other previous boxing event in the UK for a long time, both in the stadium and online. And when Eubank Jr. entered into the ring, a man came to greet him, a Saudi government official, Turki Alal Sheikh, the chairman of the General Entertainment Authority. And when you look at many modern sporting events, you'll see his face popping up everywhere. And if you read the comments on social media, he is being highly praised as boosting up the sports world, where he is using Saudi gazillions to pay people a fat sum in video games, boxing and in comedy.
Well, this shot will tell us if that red closest to the black goes to left corner. If it doesn't, he'll be opening the reds up here. You see, it obviously goes.
Let's get ready to rumble! At Riyadh season! It is time to fight!
We will put on the greatest live sporting event of all time. And as we start to get closer, the people who are involved in this card are going to start to feel how special this experience is going to be.
Everything has changed. Dawn of a new day.
You'll never see anything like this ever again in your life. It's a one-of-one.
In 2027, we are proud to announce that WrestleMania 43 will take place in Saudi Arabia as part of Riyadh season.
The International Olympic Committee is partnering with the Riyadh-based Esports World Cup Foundation to host the first ever Esports Olympics in Saudi Arabia in 2027.
Some of the biggest names in comedy have been performing at a very controversial festival in Saudi Arabia this past week, and they've been criticized by some for appearing to give legitimacy to a government with a very troubling human rights record. Holly Williams, who has reported inside Saudi Arabia many times, says the festival has divided the world of stand-up comedy.
Dave Chappelle is one of the highest paid entertainers in the United States of America, who has accumulated a fortune of a net worth of $70 million. But when the Riyadh season Saudis offered him a heavy paycheck some say up to $1 million, to perform in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. As a practicing Muslim, he made another mistake of another black convert to Orthodox Islam, as very few Americans travel abroad to see how the rest of the world functions.
I'm a Muslim. I believe in the religion of Islam, which believes in brotherhood, complete brotherhood of all people.
Malcolm X, when touring the Middle East, believed that he was around a color-blind Islam. Boy, was he wrong. If he was alive today, he would have definitely thought differently. He was a popular American personality whose very light-skinned complexion that he probably inherited from Louise Norton Little, his Grenadian mother, was non-threatening, where he could easily blend in as a popular figure in those countries in the Arab Islamic world. In a meeting with King Faisal of Saudi Arabia, Malcolm X was ill-informed of the 500,000 slaves held in that Saudi kingdom, and the other blacks who were held as slaves in Arab-dominated nations. Now, Dave Chappelle foolishly said that there was more free speech in Saudi Arabia than there is in the United States of America. Whether he was fully aware of it or not, he sounded just like President Donald Trump, who excused the killing of the Saudi journalist who worked for the Washington Post. Dave Chappelle, like Malcolm X, was ignorant to how Saudi politics works, where even juveniles are sentenced to death who speak against the government. And if you are a journalist in Saudi Arabia and you speak out against the House of Saud, you will lose your life. So no, Saudi Arabia is not a land of free speech. But with celebrities being paid a huge lump sum, it makes them stay in their lane. So Nicki Minaj is just following the ideas of the deep state, which may include Project 2025. But the situation in Nigeria, which she is promoting, is not that straightforward. And you have to carefully and patiently listen to different sides and go over peer-reviewed data before jumping to conclusions emotionally.
Let's go straight in. We've been having this conversation now since that post by the US president claiming that there is a Christian genocide happening, particularly in the northern part of the country. Now, you're the chairman of the Christian Association of Nigeria in the north, so I'm sure you'd have a better picture of what is happening. So my first question to you, which has been asked to a number of people with differing answers, is this: would you consider what is going on right now against Christians in the north as a genocide? And then going back to your take around conversation, dialogue as a response to the US. What does this mean? Can you break that down further for us? What does dialogue, or what would dialogue look like?
Let me go straight to your question. Can I consider what has been happening as genocide against Christians? And my straightforward answer is yes. Y-E-S, yes.
This is certainly unfortunate, of course. Any incident, any loss of life is absolutely unfortunate. Those who know the terrain well know that terrorism has no color and no religion and no tribe. People of all religions and all tribes are dying as a result of terrorist acts. But it's very unfortunate. We even know that Boko Haram and ISIS are killing more Muslims than Christians.
In Nigeria, where the population of 220 million is split between Christians, mostly in the south, and Muslims, mostly in the north, widespread violence is a plague, and everyone is a potential victim. But many insist the reality isn't as simple as Trump's narrative. Experts and data say that while some attacks target Christians, they are a small percentage of overall attacks that appear to be motivated by religion. The numbers indicate that across the country's north, most victims of overall violence are Muslims.
Each year, there is variation. If we look at the number of fatalities in 2025, so far there's actually been more Muslims killed in these sort of religiously targeted attacks. But in 2024, the opposite was true. There were more Christians killed. So these sort of trends do vary year on year.
Nigeria is ground zero
the focal point of the most brutal and murderous anti-Christian persecution in the world today. Moderate Muslims who speak out against the radical Islamists or refuse to conform with the serial killers are murdered as well.
We are led to understand that both Christians and Muslims in Nigeria are being killed. But why has Nigeria become a place of concern for the US government? I will explain. A number of years ago, a woman who was working in banking at the time said that if I download the Bloomberg app and read the Financial Times that I've already been doing for years, I would understand what is really going on behind the scenes in the world. And what she said was so true. The late Kwame Nkrumah, the leader of Ghana, was also aware of this. And when he alerted people on who pulls the strings behind the scenes, he was overthrown in a bloodless coup. For he wrote a book titled Neo-Colonialism, the last stage of imperialism. And I shall quote a couple of excerpts from that book so you'll understand the game. He said, quote, "Modern neocolonialism is based upon the what? Control of nominally independent states by what? Giant financial interests. And how do they plan to implement that? Well, though the aim of the neocolonialists is what? Economic domination. I repeat, economic domination. They do not confine their operations or agenda to the economic sphere alone. How else? Well, they use the old colonialist methods of what? Religious, educational, and cultural infiltration. Now, for the control of fuel resources, that is oil and gas, is a prime motivator in the frantic competition between what? Monopolies. Really, to understand what goes on in the world today, it is necessary, and look at the words highlighted in green, to understand the economic influences and pressures that stand behind the political events. For the financial columns of the world's press give, in fact, the news behind the news. So let us lay a foundation so you can understand why Nigeria has become a place of concern.
We've got critical minerals, we've got rare earths, and we're looking for partners to develop such resources and capacity.
Okay. And Nigeria has become China's important trade partner in Africa. What are the focal points of these ties, if you could give us more information?
Well, apart from the obvious, hydrocarbons, oil and gas, Nigeria is the #1 oil producer in Africa, produces gas as well. LNG, we have a 6 train LNG.
According to the Wall Street Journal, China is planning to block companies connected to the US military from accessing rare earth magnets. Those magnets are used in fighter jets, submarines, missiles.
What if your phone, your laptop, and even your life depended on one country's natural resources? Rare earth elements are a key component in everything, from submarines and fighter jets to washing machines and flat-screen televisions. But now China, which produces most of the world's supply of rare earths, is limiting such exports. Rare earths refer to 17 metallic elements, scandium, yttrium, and 15 types of lanthanides. Today, Chinese companies dominate the rare earths industry. China also dominates rare earths production. It controls 69% of global mine production, far exceeding any other individual country. Beijing imposed export controls on some rare earths in July 2023. The restricted list has grown since then. These have impacted nearly 80% of US Department of Defense weapon systems, including its fighter jets, ships and submarines, Predator drones, missiles, bombs, and advanced radar systems, according to defense analyst firm Gavini. In many cases, rare earths are more than just vital. For many modern weapon systems, they are irreplaceable. Gallium, for example, is used for radar systems. But 98.68% of the world's gallium is produced in China. With rare earths becoming a key point of contention in the US-China rivalry, companies around the world are trying to cut their reliance on Chinese supplies.
Now, the United States put tariffs on China. China said, oh, so you think you're bad? You're not going to get access to the rare earths that your huge military totally depends upon. So, Donald, if you think you're a bad man, continue with your foolishness. But don't forget, we hold the key to your technological progress. You see, China controls the rare earths that the world depends upon to keep the digital technology going. But guess what? China's trading partner, Nigeria, is also investing into a huge rare earth minerals project, which, if it's successful, will be Africa's largest rare earth plant, estimated at $400 million. And China has also invested into Nigeria's lithium for the future of EVs, that is, electronic vehicles, where Nigeria plans to launch lithium processing plants with Chinese investments. And China is already investing into the funding of lithium processing factories in 2025. And this investment is worth billions. Now, lithium is very important to the digital age, for that is how batteries work. It sadly does usually come with hard labor by the people of Nigeria and also in other parts of the world. And when you charge your mobile cell phone, it is the lithium that gives the phone its boost. Though you may not be aware of it, Nigeria has been on the globalist radar for a number of years now. Let me explain. The late Henry Kissinger was a US geopolitician, and one of his specialties was studying population expansion. So he published a report in 1970 that was declassified in 1980, titled National Security Study Memorandum, NSSM 200. And the words highlighted in blue says implications of worldwide population growth for US security and overseas interests. And who was one of the targets? Well, let's see. Quote, assistance for population moderation should give primary emphasis to the largest and fastest growing developing countries where there is special US political and strategic interest. It mentions 12 countries, and guess what? Nigeria, as you can see, is highlighted in green, is one of them. Interesting. It continues. African countries endowed with what? Oil rich and other what? Natural resources may be in a better economic position to cope with population expansion. Now, who falls into this category? Well, Nigeria. Now remember, this was produced in 1970. Already it says the most populous country on the continent, with an estimated 55 million people in 1970. Nigeria's population by the end of this century is projected to number 135 million. This suggests a growing political and strategic role for Nigeria, at least in Africa south of the Sahara. Now, I think it should be noted that Nigeria has 53 plus minerals in its vicinity in different locations. But what is very strange is that 1 minute Trump calls Nigeria bleep hole countries, he bans Nigerians from getting visas from entering into the United States, especially outspoken critics of his first and second administration. Then all of a sudden, he now wants to help Nigerians? Something is not quite adding up. It does not make any sense.
few weeks where we've been seeing a number of U.S. officials, including Senator Ted Cruz, joining a chorus of U.S. Christians on the political right, really seeming to want to take a closer look into Nigeria.
One of the biggest challenges on trying to share and spread the everlasting gospel in society around the world is when you meet constant rejection from all different types of people. Not for anything you have done personally, but when professed Christians always want to go to war. And people can see that they don't represent Jesus Christ at all, but are promoting an ethnocentric ideology using religion as a front.
Nick Fuentes, thank you for doing this.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
I wanted to meet you. I've heard about you.
I've heard about you.
Not what you're pivoting against, which are a lot of the same thing. You know, I agree with you on some of the things you're pivoting against for sure.
I'm an American nationalist.
Me too. So you watch PragerU videos?
Oh yeah, I was in the Prager Force.
What's that?
It's a Facebook group for college kids, and they promote the PragerU videos. But I'll never forget one show. He goes live and he says, America's becoming a majority non-white country. Does anybody think that's a good idea? And I was thinking to myself, yeah, that actually doesn't sound so good. I didn't really even think that America's becoming majority minority like that.
Wait, so you were radicalized on race by Mark Levin?
Yes.
Are you making that up? Or that's
a real story.
Amazing.
Mm-hmm. He planted the seed at least. I know who I am. I had a very firm grounding of what I'm about, which is that I was deeply Catholic, and I still am. So I go to college, and I'm just, at that point, a huge Trump supporter. You know, so for us, he was like the savior of Western civilization.
Tucker Carlson. What role do you think Tucker Carlson should play in the Republican Party and the conservative movement going forward?
Well, I found him to be good. I mean, he said good things about me over the years. I think he's good. We've had some good interviews, but you can't tell him who to interview. I mean, if he wants to interview Nick Fuentes, I don't know much about him, but if he wants to do it, get the word out. Let him, people have to decide. Ultimately, people have to decide.
Though people claim right-wing extremism is tearing MAGA apart, both Tucker Carlson and President Donald Trump have endorsed its rising star, Nick Fuentes. That is how ideas spread, when they are endorsed by the higher-ups. But when the peer-reviewed PLOS ONE was closely reviewing the political views of the MAGA, short for Make America Great Again movement, they saw that highlighted in blue that MAGA Republicans are more likely than others to endorse political violence. And this is why the Huffington Post said that MAGA-aligned Christians act in ways that contradict Jesus' teachings. Now, Making America Great Again is a covert, ethnocentric term where throughout its short-lived history, these Christian nationalists want to retain that status quo. Don't you find it very strange that MAGA has an interest in the people of Nigeria? That's very odd. For the Nigerians' distant relatives in the United States under Trump 2.0 are quietly being removed out of prominent positions in government and in the media. They even want these foundational black Americans to be removed out of history. So why does MAGA have sympathy for the black Christians in Nigeria but don't want to integrate with the black Christians in America? Well, you have to understand what type of Christianity people in America uphold.
I hate my opponent, and I don't want the best for them. I'm sorry.
Have you ever asked God for forgiveness? That's a tough question. I don't think in terms of, I'm a religious person. Shockingly, because people are so shocked when they find this out, I'm Protestant, I'm Presbyterian, and I go to church and I love God and I love my church. And Norman Vincent Peale, the great Norman Vincent Peale was my pastor. The power of positive thinking. Everybody's heard of Norman Vincent Peale. He was so great. I think if I do something wrong, I think I just try and make it right. I don't bring God into that picture. I don't. No.
Now, President Donald Trump says he hates his enemy, though Jesus Christ instructs us to act differently. He also says he does not ask God for forgiveness, but he identifies himself as a Presbyterian, a Protestant. He says his former pastor was the late Norman Vincent Peale, whose famous book was New Age Philosophy for the Christian Mind, titled The Power of Positive Thinking, a precursor to the ideologies of Tony Robbins and Deepak Chopra. Now, Norman Vincent Peale was a Freemason. This is confirmed by the website of the Grand Lodge of British Columbia and Yukon. But what level of Freemason was he? Well, if you go onto the website of the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, the Supreme Council 33rd degree, they openly show Norman Vincent Peale as one of their members. This is probably where the positive thinking idea came from. Now, you are going to get those fanatical MAGA supporters who linger around people's DMs defending Donald Trump, saying he is King Cyrus and, oh, he's a flawed man. And like Satan, they will quote scripture to justify their arguments, for they think his actions should go unchallenged. They will quote 1 Timothy chapter 2, verses 1 and 2, and say that we should pray for all those that are in authority. And I totally agree. But they should also be challenged when their decisions affect the masses. Let us give an example. In Luke chapter 3, verses 1 and 2, in the Middle Eastern province of Tiberius Caesar's Roman Empire, it mentions an individual called Herod, who was the Tetrarch of Galilee. A tetrarch is a ruler or a governor of a province. In the same chapter, John the Baptist rebuked Herod for messing around with his own brother's wife. Unfortunately, it cost him his life. In the same gospel, in the 13th chapter of Luke, the Pharisees said to Jesus, listen, if you don't leave here, Herod is going to kill you. Jesus said, tell him to keep his skin quiet. Go ye and tell that fox, I am on a mission and that salvation will be accomplished. So we can address the political actors. Now, most Americans, according to Pew Research, said that Donald Trump is not a Christian. He definitely does not qualify, for he teaches Christians to abandon empathy, and the MAGA's gospel is an evangelical perversion of Jesus' message of radical love to one of hate and aggression, according to the Guardian newspaper. Now, Trump told the Venezuelan President Maduro that he doesn't want to bleep around with the United States. He used the F word. I had to airbrush it out. So how do we actually follow Jesus? Well, by spending quality time in the Word of God and closely imitating his life instead of following a system. Now, in a book titled How Are We Complete in Christ, this is probably one of the best works that is simple but deep on how to follow Jesus. And it says, quote, causes are best known by their effects, trees by their fruits, fountains by their streams. Now the Christian, who is an Israelite indeed, as Christ speaks concerning Nathanael. The word Israelite means one who has overcome, prevailed and gained victory over sin. Genesis chapter 32 and verse 28. One who sincerely labors more to be than seem religious. One whose great care is that his heart may keep an even place with his tongue in all his outward professions. Can somebody please screenshot this quote and send it to Donald Trump and apply it to yourselves? Are you comfortable unto Christ? He says. Is the same mind in you that was in him? Are you holy and humble and self-denying, and in all things followers of that pattern which he has set before you in his own example? The great and main condition is self-denial. A man, oh man, is that a challenge? Read it in Luke chapter 9 and verse 23. Together with a full resignation of ourselves to Him, and self-denial, if duly considered, is the greatest self-advantage. As tough as this Christian journey is, let us keep striving to be like Jesus Christ. Question: have you ever wondered why President Donald Trump, the self-proclaimed Prince of Peace, wants to bomb both Venezuela in South America and Nigeria in West Africa?
Whenever you talk about Venezuela, we have to be able to talk about energy. So let's get started with kind of the recent history of Venezuelan oil production and talk a little bit about the geopolitical implications of what may be happening.
Sure. A couple of things about the Venezuelan barrels. First, they're heavy and sour. They work well in the refineries in the Gulf Coast here in the United States. Starting in November of 2022, when the Biden administration granted a general license to allow Chevron to resume production and export activities, you can see production rising from roughly 600,000 barrels per day, to just a little bit over 1 million, depending on which statistical outlet you get your data from.
650,000 barrels per day that we've done is the largest single train, not only in Africa, in the world. And we just wanted to make a point, and which we have now, achieved.
So the wealthiest black individual on the earth, the billionaire Nigerian businessman, confirmed that Nigeria has the largest oil refinery on the earth. Although they are the highest producer of oil in Africa, recent discoveries have shown that they won't totally depend upon their LNG. The Nigerian Minister of Solid Minerals Development confirmed that Nigeria has $700 billion worth of mineral wealth. To name a few, it has sapphires and emeralds, marble, copper, gold, limestone that makes up 10% of the planet's surface. It has timber, and it has 13% of global tantalum output, and coal that will be used for $7 million daily exports for fertilizers. It also has something else that is essential. When you use transport on the road, there is a material that keeps your roads pristine. It is a liquid, oily substance called bitumen. And when you see workers on the road drilling, digging, and shoveling to make the roads more safe for transportation, it is the bitumen that is used on the roads. Now, in a peer-reviewed report, a case studies in construction materials, when it was analyzing the bitumen in Nigeria, this 2016 study said, quote, Nigeria is greatly endowed with large deposit of natural what? Bitumen at Agbabu, Odo State. The country was reported to have a proven reserve of about 42.47 billion tons of bitumen, a quantity which is estimated to be, guess what, the second largest in the world, but yet to be explored for economic purposes. So Nigeria has the second largest bitumen reserves on the entire planet. So before you emotionally react to why a country goes to war, always type up the country's natural resources and you'll understand the conflict. Now, if you read this article in the London Guardian newspaper, you'll see that Nigeria has been a target by Western colonialists for years if you study the walls of Benin. Now, if you go into the British Museum, you'll see the Portuguese carved into both metal and ivory. And in the 16th century, these Portuguese said, according to that newspaper article, that there was no crime, they had street lamps, and they had a well put together drainage system in Nigeria. And the Portuguese were trading with a highly sophisticated African state. They knew it. When curators have observed the African artwork in Nigeria from the Nok culture of around 1000 BC to the Igbo Ukwu culture, as there's headers you can find in the British Museum, the Ife art and the Benin art, they are now admitting, reluctantly, that in the London Independent in the year 2010, in an article titled Sculpture That Was Deemed a Bit Too Complex for Africa, it read, quote, "Sculptures discovered in Nigeria and neighboring Benin is now accepted by the curatorial community that the advanced artistic techniques used to create this sculpture were more advanced than those of Renaissance Italy and comparable to those of the artist Donatello." Despite of this, Europeans got a bit greedy and they started to use black bodies from West and Central Africa to economically sustain their colonies and plantations. But if you think that when slavery was abolished in the Americas, Nigeria, a colonial name, was now left alone, well, that's what you think. It still became a target. The late John Maynard Keynes was a British economist who has been called the father of global modern economics. When observing the benefits of African wealth to Europe, he published a book titled The Economic Consequences of Peace, and he detailed what will benefit the European economic market. And he said, quote, "One of many novelties, the resources of tropical Africa then for the first time came into large employ, and a great traffic in what? Oil seeds began to bring to the table of Europe in a new and cheaper form one of the essential foodstuffs of mankind. In this economic El Dorado, in this economic utopia, as the early economists would have deemed it, most of us were brought up. So the Nigerian palm oil trees were essential to the European economy at one time. And even when it was shifted to Asia, in Nigeria to this very day, families still pick these in high number for the global market. But even at the height of its profits, it created a problem in the region in the 19th century. For it wasn't the British imperialists alone who profited from the palm trees, but local chiefs also became wealthy from this plant. What I'm about to say is documented in these two books, The Life of James Pinson Labulo Davies on the left and Jaja King of Opobo on the right, both almost 300 pages long. James Davies was a 19th century wealthy, self-made middle-class Yoruba Nigerian businessman. He was a member of the British Royal Navy, a merchant sailor, a naval officer, an independent ship owner, a patriot, a philanthropist, a pioneer industrialist, a statesman, churchman, and a zealous missionary for the Lord Jesus Christ. He acquired his vast wealth by becoming a pioneer in cocoa cultivation. Now, in the obituary of King Jaja of Opobo in August 1891, it showed that this powerful 19th century Nigerian trader acquired a huge amount of wealth from the palm oil industry. Now, he was born into slavery in Africa, but he rose from slavery to become a king, and he became a middleman in the palm oil trade, who controlled all the important trade routes along the rivers with his strong connections to tribal chiefs. Now, European traders thought that he was just too wealthy and powerful and saw him as a threat to their financial interests. So they arrested him, tried him, and shipped him from West Africa to the West Indies in the Caribbean, where he was like a celebrity in the Caribbean's eyes. But I have to make it unequivocally clear, if you do not understand the past, you will not make sense of the present. And as this study starts to wind down, I will show you why these places are still targeted to this very day.
The challenge, however, is I think Africa also has a role to play in this large conversation. It's a continent that is blessed with all of the things that we have. It just isn't making the right impact. With Congo alone, that can add what is almost 30% to their GDP, and that can transform the entire continent.
To really understand Africa's historical roots, we have to study the most reliable historical document on the earth, the Holy Scriptures. Now in Genesis chapter 2, we are introduced to the very first habitation for man. Our first parents were put into a place called Eden, and it was a garden that was eastward in Eden. And in that botanical environment, there was a river that was to water the garden that branched into 4 heads or 4 rivers. One of the rivers, according to Genesis chapter 2 and verse 13, was called Gihon. It surrounded the whole of Africa, which the ancient Greeks called Ethiopia, that the Arabs called the Sudan, but the Bible calls it Kush. Today, demographers and topographers have observed that the 1569 world map by Gerardus Mercator, the Flemish cartographer, still the current world standard atlas since the 18th century, has many flaws, and the continent of Africa is a lot smaller than its actual size, and it has misrepresented its volume. China, India, and the United States can comfortably fit into Africa with plenty of space to still move around. But how big is it? For it is huge. It has 30.37 million square kilometers that covers 20% of the planet's land area and 6% of its total surface area. It holds 65% of the world's arable land and 10% of the planet's internal renewable water source. It is considered the most diverse continent for animals, with the largest megafauna species and freshwater fish. This is due to its varied ecosystems and its consistent climate, unlike the northern hemisphere where many of its creatures died during the Ice Age. Africa is home to some 30% of the world's mineral reserves, 8% of the world's natural gas, and 12% of the world's oil reserves. It has 40% of the world's gold, with the largest reserves of cobalt, diamonds, platinum, and uranium. Apart from the short episode of the Black Pharaohs conquering Egypt, with the biblical Taharka temporarily expanding into Europe, they have never been a world conquering power. Well, they didn't need to, when they have all the natural resources at their disposal, and plenty of land. Now, when the prophetic clock started to tick with the countdown of world empires and their rise and fall to the end of time, God used different metals and wild animals to symbolically represent different conquering nations. But these are Eurasian powers. There are no African powers mentioned among those 4 conquering powers. For to be a conquering power, you have to be brutal. Let us give 2 examples. Julius Caesar founded the Roman Republic, or at least expanded it. But in his thirst for domination, he left behind a huge trail of dead bodies. Now in Daniel chapter 11 verses 16 to 19, he is mentioned not by name but by deed, and his death in verse 19 was as a result of how he lived. The Roman historian Pliny the Elder, in his book Natural History, respected him but said that he was too destructive. He said, quote, "I consider the dictator Julius Caesar the most outstanding person in respect of his mental vigor. But I would not credit to his glory the fact that in addition to winning victories against fellow citizens, he killed how many? 1,192,000 men in battle, a very great wrong against the human race." And Daniel is very clear that he laid the destructive foundation for the last world power, where many of the mother of harlots' daughters are just as destructive as their mother. In the Assyrian section in the British Museum, these Western Asian conquerors were so brutal. They beheaded people, held their decapitated heads in their hands, and also put them on trees as trophies. And look, they even skinned people alive. And their atrocities were so sick that God had to say something and tame them through Jonah and condemn them through the prophet Nahum. Where in Nahum chapter 3, God described the Assyrians. He called Nineveh, the capital of Assyria, the bloody city, where there is a multitude slain and a great number of carcasses, and there is none end of their corpses. They even stumble upon their corpses. Now the Sudanese Kushite Empire was just as pagan as the surrounding nations, for the Kushites worshipped the sun, the Babylonians worshipped the sun, and the Romans also worshipped the sun. The Kushites revered the male reproductive organ called the phallic. So did the Babylonians in Asia and the Romans in Europe. But the Kushites were not brutal. When Shabaka, apparently the first black pharaoh who conquered Egypt, his northern neighbor, took control of that country, how did he treat his subjects? Well, Herodotus tells us that Egypt was invaded in great force by the Ethiopians, the Sudanese Kushites, under Sabakos, the Greek pronunciation for Shabaka, their king, who remained master of it for 50 years. When an Egyptian committed a crime, it was not the custom of Sabakos to punish him with death, but instead of the death penalty, he compelled the offender, depending on the serious nature of the crime or offense, to raise the level of the soil in the neighborhood of his native town. You see, the Kushites were very tolerant. The Greek historian Homer also documented that the Kushites were a very tolerant people, not brutal, not torturous, and not a conquering people. And a Haitian scholar, when studying the classics, picked up on this, and he documented it in a book titled The Equality of the Human Races by the Haitian scholar Joseph Furman. When quoting a passage of Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, he said, quote, Homer, among other passages in the Iliad, states that the Ethiopians were renowned for their justice. Jupiter came down yesterday toward the ocean to attend a feast in the land of the Ethiopians, who are renowned for their justice, and all the gods followed him. How better can one praise a nation and a race than to depict it as a friend of the gods? Today, the Sudan, who both Herodotus and Homer described, is a very different place that is described as the worst humanitarian crisis on the earth.
Allahu Akbar. The symbolic Sudanese city of al-Fashir has fallen to paramilitary forces after weeks of intense battles and a brutal 18-month siege. Aid workers and advocates have warned of the humanitarian catastrophe that will unfold if al-Fashir falls to the rapid support forces. So what does their takeover mean for the people of Darfur and the state of the war in Sudan?
The destruction of Sudan's cultural heritage and what that loss means for its people and for the very idea of Sudanese identity.
This is a gold mine in northern Sudan. Sudan is the third largest gold producer in all of Africa, behind South Africa and Ghana. Gold makes up 70% of its exports, and it's estimated 85% of that comes from small-scale mining, not large industrial operations. The country's officially declared gold production has nearly doubled since the start of the war, 65 tons of bullion last year, but the real figure is estimated to be much higher. Analysts say most of the illicitly exported gold is smuggled abroad by the paramilitary RSF.
Sudan is the world's largest producer of gum arabic, accounting for 70% of the global supply. Sourced from acacia trees, gum arabic is a key ingredient used in the manufacture of sodas, candy, and makeup products.
Makeup brands, the company like Nestle and her cereal, Colgate toothpaste for your teeth, M&M chocolate, the soft drink company Coca-Cola, and the many sweets or candy that we consume every day all have one thing in common. They totally depend upon the ingredient gum arabic that comes from the Sudan that produces most of it. So the world depends upon the Sudan for this product. But more light is coming out on who is stoking the war, and it is a lot of players. Ukraine, China, Russia's Vladimir Putin, UAE, Iran, and guess what? The Western bankers, where 60 European banks are suspected of influencing tensions in the Sudan, where they have invested over $761 million against civilians in South Sudan. Many of these banks have been exposed and have had to pay damages for their atrocities, like the French bank BNP Paribas. What does Sudan have what outside players crave? Well, it has vast oil, gold, and agricultural resources, but it is also where it is geographically located. In an interesting article on CNN titled "Sudan's Bloody Conflict is Plagued by Foreign Influence," a portion of it says some already covered, quote, "Sudan is seen by many as strategically important within the wider region. It is a bridge between the Middle East and Africa, where Sudan controls some 500 miles of the Red Sea coast along a major shipping route. It has plenty of agricultural land and significant gold deposits. It is the world's top producer of gum arabic, a food, pharmaceutical, and cosmetic ingredient. It also plays a key role in water diplomacy in the region, with some 400 miles of the Blue Nile flowing through its territory. So the Sudan is demographically located in some of the key global maritime trading routes, and whoever controls the sea lanes controls the world. But what is very interesting, that from its very earliest inception, it has always been a target for war. Now, in the British Museum, this 14th century BC painting of Kushite Sudanese Nubian archers are warring with their northern neighbors, the Egyptians. This painting is the 1885 Battle of Abu Klea between the British Army and the Sudanese Mahdi forces. And the historian Dus Muhammad Ali, the British missionary-educated Sudanese Egyptian, in his book In the Land of the Pharaohs, details the background to that bloody conflict. But when scholars have traced the oldest known war in the post-flood earth, it has been traced to, guess where? The Sudan in northeast Africa. So unfortunately, it is a land that does not get much time to rest. But today, in a climate where people are looking for the most ancient records to put the pieces of the past together to understand the present, people are tracing some of the oldest customs in the world to the Sudan, for it has a history that has been highly ignored and overlooked for too long. And it has come for that time for people to write their own narrative without outsiders dictating to them how they should interpret who they are. And in the age that we are living in, there are people who are sincerely searching for the truth, and they want clarity, not speculation. So it is very important that we set the record straight. For a false view and a wrong interpretation of history can give a person a distorted view of the Creator, where they will lose out on eternity. So let's fit in those missing pieces in the jigsaw puzzle. There is a current held deep-rooted belief that the light of the everlasting gospel first came into Africa via Western imperialism. But they failed to mention the first Sudanese convert to Jesus Christ in Acts chapter 8. For in a book titled Negroes and Indians Advocate, this 17th century Anglican missionary, observing the injustices during the Atlantic slave trade, said, quote, "Negroes are natives of Africa, believed to be descendants of Ham. Did not the God of this world admitted into the church both the Egyptians, among whom Saint Mark was bishop, and the Ethiopians, unto whom Saint Matthew and other of the apostles preached, and the Holy Ghost especially commanding Saint Philip to preach to the eunuch, a nobleman, as is supposed, of the same country." First witness. In another book titled The Egyptian Sudan, the late English Assyriologist and Egyptologist Sir Ernest Alfred Wallace Budge more or less reiterates the same thing concerning the Sudan, and he said, quote, "The Christianizing of the northern Sudan was as a result of the preaching of Saint Mark in Alexandria, and the phase of Nubian Christianity that is currently known to us bears the marks and character of the form of Christian belief and teaching were promulgated by the Jacobite or Monophysite patriarchs of that city." Second witness. Prior to the gospel entering onto the plains of the Sudan, what influence has the Sudan had on surrounding cultures? Well, I watched this discussion of these Sudanese Americans titled The Ladies of Sosa podcast, and I learned something that was very, very interesting. One of the men who was on the panel said, henna that has been routinely credited to the Muslim Arabic world is actually from the culture of the Sudan, as the henna plant is found in the River Nile. I have not seen anyone challenge it as of yet, but there was something that was definitely for true. Throughout the Arab Muslim world, both men and women wear this attire, this item of clothing called, and forgive me if I pronounce it wrong, the jalabaya, a full-length outfit that leaves room for the neck. Now, the way this clothing is advertised online, you'd think that it is an outfit from the Arab Muslim world, but its origin can actually be traced to the Sudan, for it is one of their most popular forms of clothing that is a part of the Sudanese identity, and they wear it with pride. Now, whether the Arab world will credit them or not, who knows? But if you go into the British Museum in the Sudanese section, from around the 14th century BC, you can see these Cushite Sudanese men with the attire that the current Muslim world now wears today. That is why history is very, very important and helps you to make sense of the world today. In the Egyptian section, you can see that same attire also. So you can clearly see that it goes right back into antiquity. That is why it is also important to go to the source. And in the Petrie Museum, which is just around the corner from the British Museum, on display you can see the oldest known dress in the world, and you can see the same design. Do you understand what God says? That there is no new thing under the sun. Now, the most heated discussion in academic circles is who is older, the ancient Egyptians or their neighbors in the Sudan. These debates sometimes reach boiling point. For when you go into the British Museum, you can see, as has been shown, the striking similarities. This is Sudanese pottery, but this is Egyptian pottery. This is an Egyptian headdress, but this is a Sudanese headdress. This is a Nubian king pharaoh, but this is an Egyptian pharaoh. And these artifacts in the British Museum show that they are one and the same. Now, if we are to assess history properly, then we have to go right to the source. For Genesis chapter 10 tells us that kingship started with that rebel, Nimrod. And the 19th century Bible-based Black American historians Pauline Elizabeth Hopkins on the left and George Washington Williams on the right both confirm this. But what saith the Greco-Roman world in the classics? The Greek historian Diodorus Siculus settles the argument once and for all in his vast volumes of work, and he said, quote, "The larger part of the customs of the Egyptians are what? Ethiopian or Kushite Sudanese. The colonists still preserving their ancient manners. For instance, the belief that their kings are gods, the very special attention which they pay to their burials, and many other matters of a similar nature are what? Kushite Sudanese or Ethiopian practices." Argument done. As shown in a previous study, there is a new trend among Western women to wrap your baby in cloth, which is a far better bonding technique than putting them in a pram. But if you go into the British Museum, you can see that the women of the Sudan were practicing this form of baby bonding from antiquity, thousands of years ago. And it is only catching up in the modern world. Now, the Sudanese had kings. They also had queens, Candaces. They could carve the human form into wood, into stone, and also beautifully carved into metal. They had an abundance of minerals, and they used these to trade with their northern neighbors, the Egyptians. They traded ebony with the Egyptians, and the Egyptians used this for their rulers and their luxury chairs. They sold and traded leopard skins, and the Egyptian priests used it in their pagan rituals for their gods. You can see the abundance of wealth the Kushite Sudanese had on the center left, where you can see ivory from an elephant tusk. And the Egyptians used this ivory on both their furniture and in their cutlery. But there was one animal that was potent. It was the bird, the ostrich. And this was one of the most prized creatures in the ancient world for trade. The Nubian kings and their chiefs wore the 2 ostrich feathers on their heads, as well as Nubian soldiers. The Egyptian pharaohs wore the 2 ostrich feathers on their head, as well as the Mesopotamian kings also. But it was their huge eggs that was the #1 prize. As you can see on this wall painting in the British Museum, that the ostrich, indigenous to Africa, was traded. You can also see that they also traded their eggs. And if you look around the British Museum, the Sudanese have an ostrich egg on display that they use in their culture. You can find a number of ostrich eggs in the Egyptian section, and there is also one in the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford, where it is highly decorated with animals. In the Levant, that is the land bridge between Africa and Eurasia, they also have an ostrich egg. Now, in both the Ashmolean Museum and the British Museum in Ur of the Chaldees, you can see they really took decorating the ostrich eggs to a whole new level. They even gave it a base to keep it stable. But it is the ones in Cyprus in Europe, dated around 5000 BC, that are the most detailed and decorated ostrich eggs in the whole of the British Museum. And it has many scholars intrigued. It not only shows that men were highly sophisticated at that time, but it shows that the Sudan, through its ostrich eggs, was part of a complex trade network that included Europe, Africa, and the Middle East, according to the Daily Mail. But it didn't stop there. If you ever visit the Bank of England Museum, there is a section on gold, and on display is a gold bar. My goodness, these things are so heavy. If you ever try and pick one up, your hand will definitely hurt. And the Kushite Sudanese, if you look in the British Museum, had so much bling bling. They had loads of gold, and yes, they traded it with the Egyptians, where they used it for their pottery and for their coffins to entomb their mummies. And one of the root causes of the war in the Sudan is, guess what? For the gold. And investigative research has shown that both the Russian Wagner Group and the UAE work together to create genocidal bloodshed, all for the gold in that country. But it's not for the gold only. As Africa has 65% of the world's arable land, the Gulf states, who are greedy with their dry deserts, are just buying up loads and loads of African land. That includes the Sudan. Because even with all the wealth that these greedy Islamic Arabs have, they still want more and more and more, at the expense of human lives, where the world has closed a blind eye to the sufferings in the Sudan. Do you want to know why? Do you really want to know why? Always follow the money. Now, Forbes published an in-depth article on the world's richest Arabs, and you can read the article for yourself. And it includes the UAE family, who have a $300 billion fortune, who are classed as the richest family on the earth. These Gulf states are praised by the West. Celebrities advertise their airlines, and like the Saudis, they have invested heavily into sport. These people from the UAE literally own England's Manchester City Football Club. So it is clear that football fans will close their ears to the suffering in the Sudan, because the Arab world has been able to put a muzzle over their mouth by flooding the sports world with gazillions. And who does the owner of Manchester City do business with? Oh look, President Donald Trump.
Lengthy investigation, the New York Times zeroed in on two recent deals involving the United Arab Emirates, one with a crypto company, World Liberty Financial, which President Trump, his sons, as well as the president's friend and Middle East Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and his family have a massive stake in. In May, a UAE-backed fund announced it would make a $2 billion investment in another company, but using a cryptocurrency issued by World Liberty Financial. That was a big win for the Trumps and the Witkoffs. And then just 2 weeks later, President Trump agreed to allow the UAE to buy coveted advanced American-made computer chips, despite concern the move could lead to China eventually accessing them. Now, the Times reports there isn't specific evidence of a quid pro quo here, but says that these deals have previously unknown connections, including Steve Witkoff forming a close diplomatic and business relationship with a man who largely oversaw both deals in the UAE, the brother of the country's president. Now, a spokesperson for that Trump-connected crypto company told ABC News that any reporting the two deals were connected is, quote, absurd and false in every material way.
So he wants to bomb Nigeria for killing people, but you excuse the UAE for killing people and supplying weapons that massacre whole villages.
Microsoft is spending $1.5 billion for a minority stake in G42. That's an AI startup based in the UAE.
Microsoft heavily invests in the UAE, knowing full well that our hands are full of blood. This is how dirty the game is, and I hope you can see what is really going on. Now, billionaire President Donald Trump's background is in real estate. Now, the Emirati billionaire businessman Hussein Sojwani is also into real estate. And instead of condemning their role in the war in the Sudan, Trump does business with the UAE. Because remember, it's all about the money. And don't forget that Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, his background is also real estate. And he has recently, in 2025, has turned into a billionaire. How? Because the Gulf states have invested into his company, where both Jared Kushner and the Saudis have recently brought Electronic Arts, the third largest US video game company, for a whopping $55 billion. So since 9/11, we were led to believe that we were at war with the Muslim world, when the West has always been doing business with them. I will repeat for the last time, if you want to understand what is going on in the field of geopolitics, always follow the money trail. Let us summarize this study. Nicki Minaj was cleverly selected and picked by the deep state. She could use her celebrity status to put people's guards down, and her ethnicity was cleverly chosen to excuse the invasion of a very mineral-rich continent, Africa, that has been constantly exploited by both the Arab Muslim East and the European Christian West for centuries, and it still has not stopped. I, the narrator, am a descendant of that Euro-Arab money-making machine, and anyone with any level of common sense can see that we are being duped. When has anyone ever really cared that people are being butchered and killed on the African continent, when the Bantu-speaking Christian nation of Rwanda was butchering itself? Which Western or Eastern powers came to their aid? None. So why all of a sudden have people's empathy kicked in? President Donald Trump is giving people the impression that he wants to end the genocidal conflict in the Sudan, while people are asking questions. What war has this man ever ended? He may have slowed down a conflict, but the tensions are still there. Now, I know, most of you listening are thinking, you know what? Let me just get the blue pill and get on with my life. And I understand. This is a lot of information to take in and to contain. And this study has critiqued a lot of your favorite celebrity musicians, comedians, actors, films, and civil rights activists. But I am glad that I am at least making you stop and think. Not to boycott Microsoft. We use these different companies' products every single day to function. But I want you to at least take a good look at the world and ask yourself this very serious question. Where do I go from here? You see, Even at the Doors was solely created and set up to regularly inform people of what is really going on in the world, so you don't get deceived and sucked in to the hype. But it has one overall aim, and this is where I will prepare you for the next study titled History Repeats Itself, just before I do the study on the Nephilim. Now, in Manchester, England, there is a late Victorian neo-Gothic building, and it is called the John Rylands Research Institute and Library, a part of the University of Manchester, the third largest academic library in the United Kingdom. And behind me is a manuscript that is most interesting, that your average person would just casually walk past. In this cabinet, this small papyri written in Greek is labeled P52. It was discovered in Egypt, and it is a portion of the Gospel of John, the oldest known remainder of the Gospels in the world. And it is quite small, you can hold it in your hand. I actually have a replica of it that you can order on Etsy. Now, what is very interesting, that there is a recurring argument online That is not new. That the Gospels are not authentic because they were written long after the disciples had died. There's a slight problem with that argument. In the British Museum is a bust of the Roman Emperor Titus of the Flavian dynasty. Now, Titus erected a monument in Rome to commemorate his destruction of Jerusalem in the summer of 70 AD, an act that was foretold by the prophet Daniel, confirmed by Jesus, and documented by Flavius Josephus, the Jewish Roman historian. Now, it has only been in recent times that archaeologists have excavated and unearthed the Pool of Siloam that also fell under the siege of Titus. Now, I would like to ask a question to the critical thinkers out there. If John chapter 9 and verse 7 mentions the Pool of Siloam where Jesus healed a man, how could the Gospel of John be written after the disciples if the Pool of Siloam had already been destroyed by Titus in 70 AD? How could they record something that was destroyed? Something to think about. Now, throughout the British Museum, you can see many different artifacts with Greek writing all over them. For even within the Roman Empire, not Latin, but Greek was still the dominant language spoken. So another dry argument was presented, and they say if Jesus spoke in Aramaic, which is a northwestern Semitic language from Syria, which is very similar to Hebrew, that many modern linguists are trying to preserve, for it is becoming endangered, then why are not the Gospels and the whole New Testament written in this language? Well, have you ever heard of the term lingua franca? It means, and highlighted in yellow, any language spoken or understood by various peoples over a wide area. Now, according to National Geographic, at its height, if you look at the words highlighted in blue in CE 117, Rome controlled all the land from Western Europe to the Middle East. So if the Roman Empire spanned throughout Afro-Eurasia, there were parts of it in North Africa, the Roman statesman and lawyer Cicero said something that was very uniquely prevalent within the empire. The Romans, the scholar William Whitaker said, had the widest empire, yet Cicero himself, in his oration for the poet Archias, bears witness that the language of the Greeks was more widely extended than that of the Romans. Formerly, the Greek language had various dialects, the Ionic, the Doric, and the rest, yet all Greeks were able to understand each other. So this is why the New Testament was written in Greek. And in this next study, hopefully coming out in the year 2026, if life is spared, I'm going to show you why it is important to study history, because we are all just reenacting what our early forefathers did. So as I encourage you at all times, every single thing you have seen in this study, please go and research everything for yourself. Until the next study, see ya.